I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I just didn't like being told what to do. I bet none of you have that problem, right? Like, it wasn't like I was some sort of hardcore rebel, but sometimes I just didn't like being ordered around. And chances are you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, it was the worst when, like, my mom or a teacher or a coach would tell me to do something and it just didn't make sense to me. And so I asked the very famous question, which is just why? Why do you want me to do that? Why is this a rule? Why is this a command here? Why do I have this homework? They gave me the answer that made me just want to explode out of anger, and I'll bet you know the one. Because what? Because that's right, because I said so. Because I said so. Like, I'm always like, is that supposed to be a real answer? Is that like supposed to be some blank check you can use to get me to do anything you want me to do? Like, I always thought that was the worst response. But seriously, it's frustrating being asked or told to do something that you can't understand or fully explain. Like, when you don't know the why behind it, man, that can be maddening. Like, you've most likely had this happen, let's say with your parents or step parents. You've had it happen with teachers, maybe with coaches. I bet if you have older siblings, it's happened with them. And they may not say because I said so, but it's just you've had this kind of frustrating experience. Maybe you've even had it happen with, I don't know, the local police. I won't tell anybody. But today isn't about all of that. Today is about this fact. There will be times in your life when this will happen with God. And maybe you won't actually hear God say something. But for many of you, hey, listen, maybe you've had these moments where you listen to someone speak in church, you read a Bible verse, maybe you heard a friend or family member talk about something that was in the Bible, and you thought, I'm not sure, but that seems to be coming straight from God to me. And you hear him talking, you hear him speaking, you hear him having a conversation, and you're like, man, I think through all this, God is trying to say something to me. Maybe it was something that God was asking you to do, a particular way that he was asking you to live. He was a thing he was asking you to avoid, a goal you just felt like he was asking you to go for. Whatever it was, chances are when you encountered it, you ran into two really big obstacles. And obstacle number one is it just didn't seem to make sense. Like, maybe you didn't see the point. You didn't understand how this would benefit you. And it's like, man, you felt like, this is what God wanted you to do. But if you followed along with it, you were going to be all alone. You're going to be the only one. In fact, you probably realized that the cool and popular thing to do was actually the opposite of what you felt like God was calling you to do. Maybe this happened when you heard that God didn't want you to gossip, but instead he wants you to celebrate others, even your enemies. And you started thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. If someone talks about me behind my back, it's only fair for me to talk bad about them. Or it happened when you realized that honoring your parents is what God wants, but you're like, well, that's boring. Like, breaking the rules and rebelling, like, that's way more fun. You're sitting there wondering, like, what in the world is God thinking when it comes to this? Or maybe it's when you came across the crazy teaching of Jesus that said, you should put others first and not be selfish. But you're like, man, when I do that, like, no one's going to look out for me in return. So why should I do that for someone else? All I'm going to do is miss out. See, listen, whether it's partying or dating or forgiving or apologizing, you may feel like God's way is kind of getting old. And if you've been in a church for a while, you're kind of getting impatient and wondering if you can really trust God in some of these areas. Is this really better for you? And the bad news is we've all been there or will be at some point. And some of you may be there right now in some way or another. But here's the good news. Listen, it's okay. You don't need to feel guilty about it. If you feel like, man, there's just some things that I don't understand. It's confusing. I'm frustrated. You don't need to be afraid to talk about it. And you aren't the only one to feel that way. In fact, let's just break the tension and just say this together, that God's way seems crazy sometimes. I mean, it's okay. Let's just say it out loud, all right? I know I'm just some dude on a video and you're like, this guy's weird looking, but it's all right. Let's just say it together. God's way seems crazy sometimes. Hey, it's okay to talk about that. It's okay to express that to God. You aren't hurting his feelings. Now, here's the cool thing. Joshua, this is the guy we've been following for the past couple of weeks. He had a moment where he found himself in a similar position, probably feeling the same way. And I think that you and I, we have a lot to learn from him today because, yes, Joshua felt the same thing we feel, but he learned something about God that I think could be a game changer for us. It's something that will help us understand God more and trust him when he asks us to do something that we just think seems a little bit crazy. And it's something that will make all the difference when it comes to stepping up in high school. So we're going to pick up where we left off last week, or in the last part, if you're just joining us. Joshua has just taken over for Moses, all right? Moses is like the famous guy, you see the movies with the big white beard, and he crosses the river and all that. He's taken over for Moses, and Joshua is leading the people of Israel into the promised land. Now, when we say promised land, we're referring to this country, this nation that God had promised the Israelite people. And so they're there. It's time to step up. So they cross this big river, and they're in the land. They're all excited. They're ready to go. But there's just one problem: Jericho. Okay, now you're like, what in the world is Jericho? Jericho was a big fortified city with giant walls around it that stood in their way. And the big question was, how are we going to conquer an armed city with giant walls around it? Now, let me pause there for a minute, because maybe you've seen movies like, that are kind of set like historical timepiece movies that, these cities that have big walls around it. Now, the Israelites were basically a group of nomads. Like, they had kind of been wandering in the desert. So you don't have a bunch of trained soldiers with all kinds of weapons. So there's a big difference between the army and what's happening inside this fortified city and a bunch of people wandering around with some goats and sheep. You get what I'm saying? So if you had to guess, though, what kind of plan do you think an ordinary, rational person would come up with? All right, bring on the heavy artillery. All right, let's find our best fighting men. Let's just see, what we can do. That would probably be an idea that Joshua would have come up with. But then it came time for God to give them the battle plan. And here is what he said, okay? Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands." So, hey, it's done. You're going to win this thing, along with its king and its fighting men. So now it's time for God to deliver the plan. You ready? March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns, okay? That's just the way what their trumpets were made of, in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, okay? We're going to go once a day. The last day, we're going 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. So let's create a little music here. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. And then that's it. All right? That's the whole plan. He lays it out there in front of Joshua. Now, can you imagine what he was thinking? Can you imagine what the people were thinking as Joshua delivered this plan to them? And they're like, all right, we're nervous here. That's a big city, but Joshua's going to go in. He's communicating with God. God's going to give him a battle plan. And now here it is. You want us to walk? Like the plan is to power walk, right? We're just going to around the city. And not just today, like it's going to be a week. Like this is our 1 week exercise plan. And then you want us to play some loud music while we exercise. And then we're just going to yell because we're all excited. Are you kidding me? Like, God, I know you're busy, so maybe you haven't thought this one through. Like the way you conquer a city is with weapons and ladders and catapults and stuff like that. There's no way what you're asking us to do is going to work. Like I don't get it. Do you get it? I don't get it. No one gets it. Plus, can you imagine, God, how much the guys inside the wall are going to laugh at us? Like they're just going to stand up on the top and we're going to walk around. They're going to make fun of us and they're going to throw, turkeys at us or whatever. I don't know what people threw at people back then. Like, this is going to be embarrassing. Like, literally, you have to be kidding me. And that's where this story hits home for us. Not that we've been asked to march around a city like that, but you've been there so many times. You've been in the middle of doing something God wanted you to do, or maybe even just thinking about, maybe I'll try this thing that God wants me to do. And I heard, my pastor, my student pastor talk about it, and I think I could try that, but it just seems crazy. It just seems so different. It just seems so unlikely to be the right way. It just seems like something that other people are just going to look at and not understand. It's going to be embarrassing. So you know what these people may have been thinking. But I love how Joshua responds. He doesn't let the craziness or uncertainty or unlikeliness of it keep him from doing it. Even when the people of Israel were thinking that their new leader had just lost his mind, Joshua stepped up and he just did what God asked him to do. And I can imagine Joshua was out there going, hey guys, keep walking. Keep walking. I know this sounds silly. Just keep walking, all right? We're going to go one more lap today, all right? We got it. We got it. Just trust God. Keep walking. Keep walking. And that's when this happens, all right? So this is where the passage picks up at the end of the week, okay? When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted. And at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. And now they're looking at each other like, wow, it actually worked. That actually worked. We would have never defeated the army without just this kind of intervention. Like, that's amazing. It actually worked. They walked and they kept walking. On the seventh day, God tore the walls down. And in that moment, Joshua and the people of Israel learned two really important things about the God that they obey. And I think this is important for you too. He knows what he's doing. God doesn't need our advice. He doesn't need our help. He knows. This was true for Joshua and the Israelites when God told them what to do in battle. And the same is true for us. God knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing when it comes to our friends, parents, girlfriends and boyfriends, school, sports, future, hopes, dreams, goals, actions, hurts, all of that. God knows what he's doing. His understanding and ability when it comes to the things you're facing and the decisions you're making, it's so much bigger than your own or my own. Joshua would have probably just charged at the wall, thrown some spears. They probably would have been defeated, but God was so much bigger. He tore the walls down. He knows what he's doing always. And the second thing is this: we just need to keep walking. The role of the Hebrew people was simply just to keep walking, just to keep trusting him, keep obeying him, keep doing what he says, keep living like he says. We can trust what God asks us to do. Don't give up because it's taking too long, because you can't see the outcome yet, because it seems too crazy. When you do what God asks you to do, you won't regret it. God knows what he's doing, so keep walking. And listen, this whole story may sound strange, right? Because again, we don't have a city surrounded by walls that we're trying to conquer right now. That would be cool. I would actually love that right now if I were power walking around an ancient city with walls around it, but we just don't, okay? We don't have literal walls, but we do have these, big scary things that can hold us back. Like the walls we face in high school are just big decisions and challenges. The things that seem so large and so impossible that it just doesn't seem to be a way to get around them. The places we're doing what God says doesn't make sense in our heads. And in that way, I bet some of you kind of have a wall in your life right now. It may be the wall of how am I going to act around my friends? Or the wall of how am I going to treat my stepmom? Or am I willing to cheat to get a B? Or what do I do when someone offends me or talks about me behind my back? How am I going to have fun on the weekends? And what kind of decisions am I going to make? What am I willing to do to get other people to like me? Listen, it may seem crazy when you realize what God is asking you to do, to be kind to your stepmom, to take the grade that you earned and keep your integrity instead of cheating, or offer forgiveness when someone offends you instead of getting revenge, and on in the stuff that you talk about and hear about week after week. These things sound about as crazy sometimes as walking around a wall, because sometimes God's way doesn't make sense. It doesn't. It isn't the popular options. That's just literally true for all of us. But God knows what he's doing. So keep walking. Because he's God, he knows what he's doing, and he can make walls fall down. And that's what God wants for you, is you learn to obey him even when it seems crazy, because it always pays off when we step up and obey. That doesn't mean it's easy. It's not. It doesn't mean we always get what we want. Just because we obey, we don't get what we want. It means we learn that God is trustworthy and that he is deserving of our confidence. See, he wants you to step up like Joshua stepped up and live a life that's wise, godly, one that you're proud of, but you have to keep walking. You have to keep trusting him and doing what he says. So as you head out, I want you to think about where you find yourself kind of these thoughts swirling in your head of like, man, what God's asking me to do is crazy. I can't believe he wants me to, you fill in the blank. I can't believe he wants me to do this or do that right there in that place. I want you to hear Joshua telling you. I want you to hear God telling you, keep walking. God knows what he's doing. So please, please keep walking.